Bienvenido, yo soy Terry Katz. Bonjour, je m'appelle Terry Katz, je suis directeur relations avec les médias. Welcome everybody, I'm Terry Katz. I'm the Director of Media Relations for Toronto 2015 Pan Am and Parapan Am Games. On behalf of our CEO, Saad Rafi, our Senior Vice President of Marketing, Kathy Henderson, our Senior Vice President of Media Relations and Communications, Neela Barton, and our press operations team who helped make today's event possible. And on behalf of the Toronto Star senior team that we see here today, including John Hendrick and John Cruikshank, welcome everybody. This is a very exciting day, a special day, as we open the Randy Starkman Media Centre, where several hundred media from Canada, the Caribbean, and the Americas are going to call home for the next 2 to 3 weeks of the Games. And as I look around the room today, I see a number of familiar faces. There are many journalism colleagues, many people here, as I said, from the Toronto Star, and many from the family of one of the Star's in Canada's top amateur sports reporters, Randy Starkman, and who we are paying a special tribute to today. I'd like to, in particular, welcome Estelle, Randy's mother. Welcome, Estelle.
Thank you.
Fern, where are you? Randy's sister.
Here.
Welcome, and your family as well. And to Laurie, Randy's brother. Where are you, Laurie?
He's behind you.
Welcome to you and to your family as well. And to everybody else who's joined us today for this special occasion. And of course to Mary, how could I forget Mary, standing beside me, Randy's other half. Media naranja, they say in Spanish. That means you're half orange. I don't know where that comes from. But anyway, Randy was a 2-time National Newspaper Award-winning journalist. I was fortunate to have known Randy for many years. What can I tell you about Randy? He was in Yiddish what we call a mensch. And for those who don't know what that means, you have to look it up. No. It's not easily translatable. He liked the underdog, Randy. He was super sensitive, and he cared about the people he wrote about in a way that wasn't really common, not that common at all with all journalists out there. But he was someone that athletes very quickly learned they could trust and who they really liked. Randy built special bonds with them like no other reporter that I know. He didn't just call up the athletes for interviews. He called them up to see how they or their families were doing. He bought gifts for them or their children. He was by far the biggest champion of amateur athletes and amateur sport in this country. Maybe that's because he couldn't do it quite himself. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. We played non-contact hockey, a few of us in this room. I see Steve McAllister here. I see a few others who were part of that. Mark Crawley, I don't know if you played. Phil, I don't know if you played. But I was there. I played ball hockey with Randy, and it was non-contact ball hockey. Randy was as fierce a competitor as they come, and I still have the bruises on my body from playing against him. If you want, I can show you. But seriously, there was a reason why Randy was an award-winning sports journalist, and why he was the envy of many of his media colleagues, including yours truly, when I worked at CBC. He covered 12 Olympics, 2 Pan Am Games, many other multi-sport and hugely important sports events in the course of a long journalism career. And in the lead up to every major games, he used to spend months interviewing athletes, getting to know every detail about them, everything about them and their stories that could make a better story in the end. And in typical Randy fashion, he used to confide in me before the games, about a couple weeks before. He'd always say to me, you know, I don't know enough. I don't know nearly enough. And yet he knew more than almost everybody else that was going to be going to those same games to cover them. The media center, this place was his domain. The main media center here is made up of the International Broadcast Center for rights-holding broadcasters and the main press center, which you see here behind us. This is where Randy was in his element. Often the first person here in the morning, and often the last person out at night. When the London Olympics rolled around in 2012, and Randy wasn't there, unfortunately, in the main press center, many athletes and many of us in the media felt there was something really missing from those games. In the media scrums in the mix zones, it was hard to be there and not hear Randy's distinctive voice. At these games, Toronto 2015 in his hometown, that's why Randy's voice, we really wanted it to be heard. And we wanted to find some way for Randy to be here in spirit. So I'd like to welcome the publisher of the Toronto Star, John Cruikshank, to make a special announcement about the main press center and about Randy. John?
Thanks, Terry. On behalf of all the employees at the Toronto Star, I'd like to thank the Pan Am and Parapan Am Games organizers for honoring Randy Starkman with this fine tribute by naming the main Pan Am Media Center after Randy. It's a fitting tribute because Randy was Canada's premier athletics journalist for 25 years. He was a two-time national award winner for reporting on amateur sports and a veteran of many, many international sporting events, having covered 12 Olympic Games and 2 Pan Am Games. When Randy died suddenly in 2012, the Toronto Star lost a friend and a cherished and admired colleague, but the amateur sports world also lost a champion. He was courageous, he had perseverance. He was simply one of the best sports journalists this country has ever produced. He was fearless, relentless, because he cared deeply for the sports and the people that he wrote about. Senator Nancy Green Rain, the 1968 Olympic ski champion, summed up that loss best when she said, paying tribute to Randy in the Senate right after his death, "No one understood or covered amateur sport in English Canada the way Randy did, with objectivity, fairness, and a true appreciation of the complexities of the many sports that he covered. His writing showed us the character and personalities of the athletes and coaches in a way that made us appreciate what they were up against and what drives them to compete at the top international level. In Canada, there was never a bigger advocate for amateur sports, Pan Am Games sports, than Randy. He displayed dignity and respect to the athletes and to their sports. He recognized the effort amateur athletes were putting in. He researched them. He followed them over the years. He wrote about them as people, about their training, and about their competitions. As our columnist Rosie DiMano wrote, Randy has a high regard for the amateur athlete who strives for greatness without the benefit of the $1 million contract and endorsement deal. He tracked their trajectory from nobody to somebody, and they always remembered him for that. Newsrooms and media centers like this one, and especially sports departments, are a lot like extended families. Reporters and editors, men and women, all strong personalities. And while we don't always see eye to eye, ultimately, we are families, caring for each other, protective of each other. And at the Star, Randy was a huge part of our family, and we still miss him greatly. He touched our lives and the lives of amateur athletes across our country like no other Canadian sports writer ever has, or probably ever will. It's an honor to speak at this dedication on behalf of all of us at the Star family, to remember and pay tribute to Randy Starkman, one of the best journalists there is. Thank you on behalf of all the staff at the Toronto Star.
Thanks, John. You know, it's funny because I tweet a lot in my line of work. And whenever I had a tweet about Randy that mentioned Randy's name, I had more people retweeting that than anything else that I put out there. So it goes to show you the impact that Randy had, not just on the athlete world, but also amongst his media peers, amongst all of us. We all had a tremendous respect for Randy and everything that he did and everything he meant to the amateur sports world. Now, I mentioned the athletes. You could go through who's who of Canadian athletes that Randy had an incredible relationship with, that he had the deep respect for them, and they had it equally, that amount of respect for him. I could name names, I shouldn't, but I'll name a couple. Clara Hughes, Adam Van Couverdon. the list of Canadian icons in the sports world who would consider Randy, Marnie McBean is another one. Randy, some of the best relationships that they had were with Randy, and that says a lot. Now, speaking on behalf of athletes, I mentioned the special relationship and the long list. So I've asked one of those athletes with whom Randy had a really special relationship to sort of talk about what Randy meant to the athlete world. I'd like to now introduce my colleague, a good friend, Julia Wilkinson, a two-time Olympian, and somebody who shared this special bond with Randy. Julia?
Thanks, Teddy. I'll stay here. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak today on behalf of all the athletes whose careers Randy followed with such enthusiasm. It's a daunting task to speak on behalf of everybody because Randy covered such a spectrum of athletes, from gold medalists like Marnie McBean, Adam Van Couverden, Clara Hughes, to athletes who just missed the podium, or just missed the final, or just missed making the team. Randy told all of their stories. You didn't need to be an Olympic gold medalist for Randy to care. For the athletes, Randy was a friendly face in the mix zone. And trust me, after the biggest race of your life, in a bathing suit soaking wet, you need a friendly face in the mix zone. At the 2012 Olympics in London, I stood in the mix zone, choking back my disappointment and not knowing who to direct my answers to. I would always give my attention to Randy first. We always knew we could trust him. Randy told our stories accurately, and he always painted me as exactly who I was. He never misquoted me, and he never put words in my mouth. And that was especially important because Randy would ask tough questions. He didn't shy away from a story, even if it was sensitive. But he got the answers he wanted for his story because the athletes trusted him. And this was a trust that he had earned. He knew the athletes' backstories, and when he wrote about an athlete, it was always evident that he cared just as much about who they were off the field of play as the results on the scoreboard. Randy was not just a sports journalist, he was the athlete's journalist. He also wasn't a fair weather fan. He didn't jump on the bandwagon of popular professional athletes telling the same stories over and over again. He cared about Olympic sports, even if they aren't popular 3 years and 11 months out of 4. He made rowers, kayakers, swimmers, wrestlers feel like heroes in a way that is generally only reserved for professional athletes. Randy respected us. It was evident that Randy loved to cover Olympians, and in return, Canada's Olympians loved him. The loss of Randy Starkman was a loss to all Canadian athletes because he was our voice. And as an athlete born and raised in Ontario, I know, I'm sure everyone has heard me say this a million times, I know that these Pan Am Games will inspire the next generation of athletes. And it is my hope that by honoring his work and his memory here in the Randy Starkman Press Center, he will inspire the next generation of journalists to work as hard as he did to be the voice of Canada's athletes.
Now, I just spoke about the special relationship, and you just heard Julia talk about that with athletes that Randy shared. Speaking of special bonds, Mary Hines traveled the world with Randy as young reporters for 5 years covering Canadian athletes overseas. They were inseparable then, and later became inseparable as husband and wife. An interesting story I want to tell you. Before I left the CBC and came to work with the organizing committee to promote sport and athletes in a different way, I had one call to make. It was to Mary, of course. I asked her, what would Randy have said about my decision, about me doing this? She gave me a very quick answer. He would have said, go for it. So that's why I'm here. Mary is an accomplished journalist in her own right, the host of Tapestry on CBC Radio. She's one of those people, and I think I've told her this a couple of times, who could read a phone book with her soothing voice and make you want to listen. I'd now like to call on Mary to say a few words on behalf of the family.
Teddy, this is the phone book, just to make you happy. When Randy was on the road, he would call home every day. And if he was at the kind of event he loved the most, multi-sport games like the Pan Ams, our conversations would always be interrupted. We'd be talking, and Rand would call out to some guy halfway across the room. "Wolfie, V. Gates, how are you, man? Good to see you, buddy." And then he'd come back to the phone and he'd say, "Margaret, someone wants to say hi." And he'd pass the phone over and I'd say, "Wolfgang, hello. How are you?" And I finally said, "Rand, you have to stop. Nobody wants to say hi to me. And I find it a little hard to make small talk with some guy I haven't seen since 1987. And Rand never stopped, which will surprise you. He didn't stop partly because he was Rand. Of course he was never going to stop. But he didn't stop partly because when he was at the main press center, he knew everyone. And he was reconnecting with everyone. And he was in his element. No matter where in the world he was, if he was at the main press center, he was at one of his favorite places in the world. So when he phoned home, he was a little bit exuberant. When I was going through my Randy photos, trying to get some good stuff for Teddy, it was stunning to me how many of the great shots were taken in press centers. The really goofy pictures were taken in press centers. So here he is with his old friend Shin. Here he is with his good buddy Gernot in northern Italy. There he is cracking up with Paul Robbins from the US. In every picture, Randy is beaming. And it was funny because he always used to say he didn't like having his picture taken. He didn't know how to fake a smile for the camera. And I have 30 years of his accreditation at home, and he was absolutely right. Not one of those press passes even looks like him. Because someone's saying smile, and it's too fake. He didn't want to be that fake. But put him in the media center, and there is nothing fake about that grin. He is just so happy. And you'll be able to see, I think, some of those pictures here. It is true, as Teddy said, Randy would be the guy to close that press center many, many nights. A colleague Randy loved at the Toronto Star, Dave Perkins, was trying to get that team dinner together at the Olympics not that long ago. And the story goes, Perky said, "All right, everybody, 10:30, except for Starkman. God knows when Starkman's going to show up. 2:30 in the morning, I don't know." Rand wasn't dawdling. He just had so many stories to tell about his athletes. He wanted to do right by his athletes. He wanted to do right by his athletes' parents, a ridiculous number of whom he knew by name. And he always wanted to get it right for his readers, for his Toronto Star readers. He would picture Estelle at home reading the paper. And maybe she wasn't so worked up about the 100-meter hurdles or about the shot put. But if Randy was writing it, it was going to be a story about a real person, and it was going to be good. I am so grateful to everyone at the Parapan Am Games. Saad Rafi, thank you. Teddy Katz, Sana Choi, to Randy's colleagues at the Star, John Cruikshank, John Hondrick. To all of you, you honor Randy the perfect way with this Randy Starkman Press Center. This is not only the perfect gesture, but you have nailed it. And Rand would be here among all of you, closing the place every night. And the volunteers would love him anyway, because they always loved him. Catherine Henderson, Games VP, thank you for this. And thank you for being so kind and so wise on how you find your way when you lose your beautiful husband just too young. I'm going to end with something a colleague of mine said. On Thursday, just speak from your heart. It's the throbbing muscle that makes both athletes and journalists function. It was his heart that we all loved so much about Rand, and he would have loved this. Thank you so much.
Rand, as Mary liked to call him, didn't like to be the center of attention. He preferred to have the athletes there getting their due. Well, Toronto 2015 wanted to make sure that he is the center of attention as you walk in the door here. And I'm going to ask John Cruikshank, Mary if you can, Julia, to help me as we unveil this special plaque that's going to hang just outside the room as you're walking in for the games. John? Saad? Sorry, Saad Rafi, please. Now, before we conclude today, I just wanted to draw your attention to a couple of other things that are going to be here in the press center. And I want to thank Bob Hepburn from the Toronto Star and our press operations department for helping make all this come together. Toronto 2015 has dedicated this workspace that you see right here as a special place to honor Randy. This workspace contains press clippings, as you can see right here, with some of Randy's work. We have a laptop here that features a tribute video that was put together around the time of the 2012 London Olympics, which journalists or anybody who's in the press center can actually watch at their leisure. As well, you'll see here, there's different notepads, and we're going to ask other journalists, and potentially if we have some athletes coming through, athletes to write special notes, and after the games come and are over, we're hoping that we have a lot of great notes that we can share with the family when everything comes to an end here with the games. They can share their personal memories of Randy and what he meant to them, and it will be great memory for the family to have as well. You can also see there's a few photos of Randy here. Mary mentioned a few of the great ones, but actually these ones aren't from the main press center. This is one with Ella, his daughter, and you can see Randy clowning around, which was par for the course. Unfortunately, Ella's at camp today, so she couldn't be here. You also see here a flat Randy, and I'm going to call Laurie up to explain a little bit of this story if you can, Laurie, and you have some more of these flat Randys, do you not?
Yes, I do.
All right. Tell us the story of Flat Randy, for those who don't know, Flat Stanley.
Okay, so Randy was infamous for taking flat Stanleys, actually going to various schools and taking flat Stanleys that kids had produced and taking them with them to Olympics and Pan Am Games and things of that nature, and having the athletes' pictures taken with the actual flat Stanley. So what happened when in 2012, when I was going to the Olympics in London, and unfortunately, my brother was not with me. It was Mary's idea, and my sister produced this. We produced a flat Randy, which was just to symbolize one of the things that Randy was well known for with the athletes, and gave these out, and they became a prominent piece at the Olympics in London.
So we're going to take these flat Randys, and we're going to make sure people take their pictures in the various locations of the games as well, some of the athletes with flat Randys. So thanks for this. We thank you all for coming today. There's some refreshments here. Hopefully you'll be able, sorry, behind me here, Santa's pointing out to me. I hope you can stay and mingle a little bit more. It's a lovely day and lovely memories, and we hope that you can come back and enjoy the games with us. Thanks everybody for coming.